Welcome back to my studio. I hope you've been enjoying our video blog so far, and if this is the first one that you're coming across, remember to go back and look at all the other ones that we've done since the beginning of the year. Lots of tips and things to help you out with your quilting. Today our topic, we thought we would talk about needles. They are a very small but a very important part of making your quilting a success. So we've got different types of needles, different sizes of needles. If you're quilting on a domestic machine and some of the long arm machines, you will have a flat shanked needle. So these are flat shanks. It means at the back of the needle you have a flat part, so you can only insert it one direction into your machine. They're generally on the domestic machines. If you have an industrial kind of machine or the bigger long arms, then they tend to use a round shank. So that means it's totally round at the top. You can insert it in any direction. So our technical tip that you'll get later at the end of the vlog is one of the ways or the way that we use most often to help you make sure that your needle is in correctly. But let's just talk quickly about the structure of the needle. You have the shank at the top, which is the part that clamps into your machine and holds tight. And then down the shaft of the needle at the front you have a groove that actually protects your thread. So you can look closely at your needle and know which is the front side, because there will be a groove down the front. At the back there is a part that is cut out that is called the scarf. That is where your hook mechanism comes through to be able to pick up the thread and to make a proper stitch. So putting your needle in correctly is obviously going to be important. If you have the round shank and you put the needle in back to front, which happens, it's not going to stitch. So before you panic, just double check that you have that groove pointing to the front. With any free motion quilting, you're putting different stresses and strains on the needle than you normally would with straightforward stitching. If you think of a domestic machine with your feed dogs, the fabric is feeding through in one direction. It means that the needle only bends in one direction. For us with free motion, whether you're moving your fabric or you're moving your machine, you're actually allowing or causing the needle to bend because it's in the fabric as you're moving. So it's called flex. And the more flex you have, the more difficult it is to get a nice stitch quality. You could end up with skipped stitches and you could end up with shredded thread. So one of the best ways to get around that is to make sure you have the correct needle. So for normal, general construction kind of sewing, so if you're doing your piecing or if you're making clothing, you can use quite a thin needle. When it comes to free motion quilting, you need to use a much thicker needle. So for the domestic machine girls, we generally recommend a 90 needle or 100, which are 14s or 16s, so it's quite a bit thicker than you would normally use. These ones are top stitch needles by Superior Threads. They're titanium coated, which means they're stronger, they stay sharp longer. They're really nice needles. And you can use them for your piecing as well, but go with a thicker needle. For the long arm machines, handy quilters specifically, we recommend you go with a 16 as your standard go-to needle. That would be the one that you'd use for most things. If you're having problems with a thread shredding, then go to a bigger needle. The bigger needle has a bigger groove down the front, which means it protects that thread more as it goes through the fabric and stops it from rubbing and wearing so quickly. So your needles are really important. How often should you change them? Well, a packet of 10 needles, these ones for the long arm, cost 40 Rand. So it's not a lot of money. There's 10 needles in there, 4 Rand a needle. So we say one needle, one project. But they're designed to work for about 8 or 10 hours. So if you're working on a long project that's taking a lot of quilting, you may need more than one needle. If you're doing a baby quilt that takes an hour, you can obviously quilt a bit longer with it before you need to change. But rule of thumb, one project, one needle. Don't wait until you break it before you change it. That's not a good idea. Underneath the video, we will be posting a link for you for this nice poster or infographic that Handy Quilter produces. So it gives you information a little bit about tension, but also about needles, the structure of the needle, and the size of the needle you need for different threads. So if you're using a thinner thread, so a silk or the monofilament, the very fine threads, you need a smaller needle. If you're using much thicker threads, then you need a thicker needle. So download this one, and it's a good resource to just have at hand. We hope that that gives you some ideas. So we wanted to give you some information about marking tools, things for marking your quilt. Ideally, you want to get away with as little marking as possible because it takes so much time, and then you have to get it out afterwards. So it's always best to mark as little as possible, but there are times when you have no option other than to mark. So I'm going to give you my favorites, the things that I use the most. Most often is a blue pen. So you can get various brands of them. They all work in the same way. They're basically water soluble. The problem with them is that you do have to wash out the pigment. You can't just spritz it out necessarily because it can come back. If it comes back later on, it tends to be yellow, and then you cannot get it out. It is also heat set, so you can't use it with an iron or leave it in the hot sun before you have neutralized it. Otherwise, it will be there forever. Having said that, I've never had an issue so far with the blue pen, but as with all the marking methods, we recommend you test them first on your fabric and make sure that you can get them out. So blue pen is great. You can use water to spritz it out, or you can use blue line eraser. You can see my bottle has seen some action. It's well used. This is a liquid that is specially designed to neutralize the colors in the pen. So if you don't want to wet your entire quilt, you can use this. Sometimes though, it still will go into the batting and migrate along and then come up in another position. So for me, the very best thing when I've used the blue water-soluble pen is actually to put my quilt in cold, plain water, normally in the bath. Just fill it up with some water enough to cover the quilt and let it soak for 5 or 10 minutes. No heat, no soap. Once you've done that, you'll have neutralized all the pen that is in the fabric and in the batting, so it shouldn't come back at a later stage. If you buy the blue line eraser, you can buy a starter pack which has a blue pen in it, one a bit like this. It has a bottle with the liquid, and it also has one of these cute little wicking pens. So if you have a design that you've drawn on a block and you just want to amend a little bit of it, you can actually use the pen here to draw over that line and get rid of that specific line. If you were to spray the block, then you have to wait for it to dry before you can mark it again, obviously, because now it's going to be wet and the pen won't work on that. So blue pen is my #1 choice. Obviously it works best on lighter color fabrics. It'll work on most things other than blue. Second favorite for me is a plain white chalk pen. So I love these ones. You get chalk refills for it, and it literally, you put your chalk in, and it's not like a pacer pencil, but very similar, and you get a pencil sharpener with it. So you can give yourself a sharper point as you've used the pencil and it becomes more blunt, and it gives you a very nice line that also rubs out easily with your when you're using it. So these are my second favorite tool, and you get fine ones and you get the thicker ones. This one is more like a mechanical chalk pencil. It's got thinner chalks. They are 0.9 of a millimeter, so it gives you a thinner line. For me, some fabrics that very fine chalk catches in the fibers and it tends to break more. So this would be my #1 choice. Then you can also use an ultimate marking pencil. This is almost like it's chalk, but it feels kind of waxy. You sharpen it again with a pencil sharpener, and it also gives you a nice line. If you wish to remove them, you can wash it out. You can also iron it out. So it's just another option. Works again very well on darker fabrics. Then this is also popular with some of my students. It's a Clover product. It has a little wheel that puts chalk in a nice fine line onto your quilt. So there's no right and wrong in terms of what to use. I would steer clear of colored products other than the blue pen. So I wouldn't go with red chalk, I wouldn't go with blue chalk, I wouldn't go with green chalk, any of those colored ones. They tend to be pretty tricky to get out of your quilt. If you do want to use them, test it first before you actually put it on the quilt and find out afterwards that you can't get it out. The other option you have, or another option that you have, are purple pens. Those ones are air erasable. I don't use them very much myself because I don't quilt for that many hours each day. So if I do a lot of marking, by the next day invariably the line will be gone because it's air erasable. But if you're going to mark and quilt, then they also work really well. Another option that you've most likely heard of are the pounce pads. These are chalk pads. They come in various colors. We basically use white and blue. I don't trust the pink, but that's me personally. I have a thing for red. It doesn't come out very often. And these you just use with stencil, so you wipe it over your stencil and it marks very quickly for you your pattern or your spacing lines, which makes it easy. A final word, we're always asked about friction pens. I'm going to post for you a link underneath that you can also go and read. Friction pens were not designed to be used on fabric, and whilst they glide on easily onto your fabric, and the color is removed by heat, so you can iron it and the line will disappear. They appear to be ideal because they come in so many nice colors. You could find a color that would work on your quilt. The problem is they have half ink that is heat sensitive, and they have half of their ink that is gel pen, which is a permanent pen. So if you put that permanent gel on your quilt and iron it, you will get rid of the color because it gets rid of the heat sensitive ink, but the gel will always remain on the quilt and it leaves a kind of a shadow. The other disadvantage is that in very cold temperatures the color comes back. So for us, the majority of us living in South Africa, very cold weather is not so much of an issue, but it is something to remember. And for me, it's a residue that is in my quilt. I want that quilt to be as pure as possible afterwards, that it can last as long as possible. If it's got ink and other chemicals in it, then it's not going to last as nicely over time. So just bear in mind that if you're thinking of friction pens, they're not designed to be used on fabric, and personally I wouldn't use them on my quilt or on anybody else's quilt. Have a read of the article and make your own choice. So I forgot to tell you something. I'm back again. You can't get rid of me that easily. So you get different types of needles, not only different sizes and the round shank or the flat shank, but you also get sharps, ball points. You'll know from domestic machines you get stretch needles, all kinds of different things. So for quilting, you generally use a sharp needle. So on the Gros Beckett ones, if you have those needles, if you look on the bottom left of the packet, there's an R. That denotes the fact that it's a sharp. The ballpoint needles, Gros Beckett, at the bottom they have FFG/SES. That denotes it's a ballpoint. So what's the difference? Well, obviously the sharp is a sharp needle, the ballpoint is more rounded. So if you are using fabrics that are very closely woven, so for instance batiks or cotton percale, the fibers are very close together, so it makes it difficult for the needle to pierce them. If you use a sharp needle, the point of the needle actually cuts those fibers and it makes a hole. Literally, it breaks the fibers. So if you then have to unsew, it means it leaves a hole, which is obviously not ideal. It's weakening the quilt. The ballpoint needles are rounded, so they tend to separate the fibers better rather than cut through them. So if you're using percale and batiks, then your ballpoint needle is likely to be a slightly better one for you. The sharp is what you would get standard with your machine. The ballpoint is something that you can buy separately. The other thing to take into consideration, and we'll show it to you later as well, when you load your needle, we normally say that the needle should point out at 90 degrees straight towards you. If you're having trouble with thread shredding or skip stitches, you can try moving that needle just a slight bit to the right. So instead of pointing to you at 6 o'clock, move it to 5:30 on a clock or to 6:30 on a clock. It may well help you to be able to get away with or to prevent it from shredding your thread and from skipping stitches. The video at the end with the technical tip will show you exactly how to do that. I don't know about you, but it's winter here in Pretoria, and this morning it was freezing when I went out to take the girls to school. So there's nothing nicer than a snuggly quilt in the middle of winter. And the minky, fleecy kind of backings are brilliant. They make a children's quilt or even a quilt for yourself just so much snugglier. When I take these fabrics to Guild, all the ladies come up and they all want to, oh, they feel so nice. So I'm going to have a special on in my shop for the month of June. 15% discount on any of the minkies that I have. I have these three that are 1 meter 50 wide, and I have a purple one that is 2 meters 80 wide. If you look under handyquiltersa.com in the shop and look for the backing fabrics minkies, then you will find them there and they will be discounted for you. They can be a little bit tricky because they're stretchy. So underneath, again, under the video, we'll post you a link that you can go and watch one of the Handy Quilter handy tip videos on how to load these fabrics onto your quilting frame so that you don't get too much stretch in it. So make sure you go to the shop, have a look. There's not only backing fabrics, we've got everything loaded there now. To the needles that we spoke about today, the marking tools that we talked about, books, stencils, threads, you name it, it's all on the shop. Make sure you go and have a look.